do you change it unless it's broken? If it's not broken, you don't change it. If he's just a rogue cop who makes a dumb use of force decision, why do you change the policy? You change it because he didn't do anything wrong, but you don't like the reasons it happened. The reasons it happened is not because Rob Sanders went out on a limb, it's because he did what he was supposed to do and there was a bad outcome, and you get worried about what the press is going to say and what the public's going to say. But when the lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Division says, we don't have a policy that requires him to do anything other than what he did, and yet he is rung up on that policy, well, it's clear he's nothing but a fall guy. Abusive and improper treatment of a prisoner. A separate charge under the city ordinance, something that applies to every city employee. Well, how does it apply to a police officer? It applies through the policies and procedures of the police department. There is no separate standard. If there is, it is undefinable. It is completely subjective. It is the eye of the beholder as far as what's abusive and what's improper treatment. If there is no boundary on that finding, then it is fundamentally unfair to just unilaterally say, well, I think that's abusive and you're gone. How do you defend yourself from that? You defend yourself by saying, I was within the policy on use of force. I was within the policy on providing medical attention. And if it were really true that there's some separate fundamental standard premised on basic human dignity, why did it only apply to Rob? Why would it only apply to the senior guy in the room? Does basic human dignity not apply to Officer Kreitz? He was there. He knew the guy had been bounced off the wall. Officer Hibbler was there. He knew the guy had been bounced off the wall. They were both exonerated. How can that be? If basic human dignity requires you to do something more, then how can it be that it only applies to Rob Sanders? Because Rob Sanders is the fall guy for a practice that the chief probably rightly looks back at and says, I don't think this is a good idea. And he changes it. But when you've been taught how to do something and what to do for 18 years, and then you do it exactly the way you've been taught, when your use of force lead instructor gets up here and says, yep, that's how we did business, that's within our training and our policies, how do you hold him responsible for that? Only him responsible for that. Prejudgment is what's at issue here. Do the IA, but there's nothing you're going to find that's going to change my mind. Sergeant, lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, yeah, you can agree with the IA, but it doesn't matter. I make the decision. In your companies, is it fair? Is it consistent? Is it equitable to use a fall guy to affect change? Is it fair to spring something on somebody that everybody else has done, that everybody else expects is going to be done, and then impose a rule and retroactively apply it to him? You should have done something more as far as getting him medical aid. Well, you shouldn't have gone in that cell. You should have just gone and gotten him a drink of water. Well, maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that what he was expected to do was go into that cell. And so that's what he did. Draw the distinction. Is the force allowed? Well, by God, it's required at that point. So the door opens. Is the force objectively unreasonable? No. End of inquiry on force. Medical aid, no policy. No policy at all. Abusive and improper treatment. What's the standard? How do you not make it so ambiguous that it's indefinable? Clear up through the chain of command, everybody said Rob was okay. He did it right. It wasn't based on relationships. It wasn't based on friendships. It was based on an investigation that showed the facts and said, this is our policy and our practice. And it's unfair to hold one guy accountable for something that nobody else is held accountable for. You don't change the policy, change the policy. You want to stop people from putting them on the rings, stop people from putting them on the rings. But don't go on television and say Rob Sanders is a criminal. Don't vilify a man. Don't take his career away from him. Don't drag his mud through the name through the mud, excuse me, for doing what he was expected and trained to do. If it's a lousy system, fix it. But don't nail the guy. Don't crucify the guy who is simply implementing your system. I implore you to read the Internal Affairs report. I implore you to recall the testimony of the witnesses, the expectations of the department, the lack of discretion to do anything else in that situation. I implore you to look at these facts objectively, that everybody else said, this is okay. How is that fair and transparent and consistent and equitable to wind up with Rob Sanders being termed? Please reinstate him and let's get on with his career. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it very much. It's been a very long day.
Thank you. Mr. Noce?
Rob Sanders was not within the policy of the use of force, and the force he used was excessive and therefore in violation of that policy. Ted Craig, the expert, testified that gratuitous force was never to be used, and he trained on it. Just because you have a practice of violating your own policies does not make it right. And it certainly doesn't make it reasonable. A practice doesn't trump improper treatment. A practice doesn't trump abusive treatment. Hey, we do it all the time. That is not okay. A practice does not trump leaving someone chained for 12 minutes to a floor where it could kill them, maybe. They're making an argument about due process. There's two parts of due process here. The due process for Sanders is their argument. And what about the due process for Kenneth Baker? This has all been a war between the chief and them. What about him? I was so appalled when I first heard that video. He launched across that room and his head sounds like a melon, reverberating through the whole jail, police station. Where you can't even hear some of the yelling, but you can hear his head strike that wall. Well, it was okay at 6 feet, but not at 3 feet. What about 5.5 feet? He's taller than Rob Sanders, so he's roughly 6 feet tall, and I think in there you'll find he's 6'1". So does that change it a little bit? Is it 4 feet 5 inches? Do we even know? Did they even bother to go in and measure how many feet? No. So they have no idea if that was reasonable or not, even by Chad's own testimony. They're guessing. Wouldn't you do that in an investigation? Wouldn't you ask the person on the other side what happened without saying, oh, we come down and we'll arrest you? How about getting a statement from their attorney? Wouldn't you offer that to them? You offered a guy some water who was fighting, mean son of a bitch, yelling at people, horrible, wherever he was 25 minutes ago. But you calm him down. And he's blind walking through that hallway, and you're taking care of him, and you set him down on that bench. And he's calm while they're going to look for the wipes. But when they come back and tell him, drink the toilet water, that's all you got, he goes crazy. Turn the water on, over and over and over again. How many times does he blink his eyes? How many times does he clutch his head? How many times does he go over to that sink? How much pain and suffering is he enduring? Maybe it wouldn't have took just one glass of water, which you might have asked. Everybody had to make a tough decision about what's reasonable. Reasonable is a hard word. Just like reasonable is a hard word, so is improper. And so is abusive. They're all acceptable words. There's nothing vague about them. You can read the medical treatment portion and decide for yourselves. I don't envy you. All these people did this, and the ones before the chief, they all made a recommendation. The chief had to make the final, ultimate decision. And what they're trying to tell you is well, Rob Sanders got no due process. Due process is knowledge of the charges, which he certainly had multiple times, and an opportunity to be heard. He got an opportunity to be heard in the IA report with the IA folks. And he got an opportunity to be heard with the chief. He's got an opportunity to be heard with you right today. He's getting due process 3 times. There was no violation of due process here. This is a case that takes hard decisions at all levels. That pitted a department against itself is what it looks like to me. I apologize. Either way, this is a horrible result for the city. But you need to find the right answer. Make the recommendation. Whatever it is, find it. You make that hard call. Just like the chief had to.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, as I said earlier this morning, we're now going to adjourn this part of the meeting. The board will go into deliberations and we'll work on what we think is a solution or outcome. Anyway. That may take 10 minutes, it may take 4 hours. I don't have any idea at this point. Probably take more than 10 minutes, closer to hours, I'm thinking. Once we get to that point, then I will go home and write up what our decision is, a recommendation. I'll send that back and forth to the members and get all of them to confirm that what I've written up is what they thought. And then I will send that on to the city manager within 10 working days. And the city manager, of course, will wait on all the exhibits, will wait on the transcript, and I think he has 30 days to make his decision. An interesting day, as I always used to say on these occasions, and all the grievances I've heard over the years in private industry and serving on this board, there's always a lot of facts that come out that nobody thought we were going to hear. That's certainly the case today. Commend the attorneys. Good job. Both of you representing your sides very well. And we'll be noodling on this for a while. That concludes this session of the meeting. And good evening.